back to 757 Saturday Sports Talk. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel on Cova Sports TV. And you can also find this guy all on YouTube, David Glenn Show, ncsportsnetwork.com/DG Show for so much more. Happy New Year, my friend. You're our first guest for 2025. So I'm not sure what that wins you, but congratulations.
Well, Happy New Year to y'all. It's great to be with you as always. Congratulations on your success and the growth of your show. It's always fun to be with you, Coach, and Matthew as well.
Yeah, our pleasure. You've been coming on with us for many years. We can go back to our radio now turned podcasts and YouTube and internet days where we have a lot of great feedback when you come on. I want to know what's really captivated you here. The college football season's coming to a close now with the playoffs. Ed's already gone on a mini rant this morning, not as long as his Jimmy Butler rant about the bowls meaning next to nothing now, including one from our stadium, Virginia Tech, losing in the Mayo Bowl to Minnesota last night. But in the college basketball season, which has some intrigue, which we'll dive in with you here in a little bit, but what's kind of captivated you here in either sport so far as we're moving the calendar from December 2024 to January 2025?
Yeah, I'd say the starting point is that I'm just happy that we have a broader, larger playoff. You know, there's an upside and a downside to every approach to any postseason in any sport. And for a long time, the top level of college football, even as lower levels of NCAA football, were having bracket-style championship tournaments. For decades, we were told it just wasn't possible at the top level, the FBS as we now call it. And sure enough, we gradually came up with the Bowl Alliance and the Bowl Coalition and then the 4-team version of the playoff that we had for about a decade. I think it says a lot that Ohio State, for example, looks like the best college football team in America, at least right now in my eyes, and yet the Buckeyes are the number 8 seed, which means they wouldn't have even been invited to a 4-team version of the college playoff. Now, again, there are downsides. There's no doubt about it. There's an upside and a downside to every approach. But I'm old enough to remember when, the coaches would vote one team as a national champion and the writers would vote a different team as a national champion. And everybody said, there's got to be a better way. We can argue about whether there's still an even better way, but I'm glad we have this 12-team playoff, at least for now. And I'm glad we have a tournament to determine the champion rather than a bunch of people voting on that champion.
Well, Ed's also glad because, as you see, he's rocking the Notre Dame jersey. And we walked out of an establishment, David, you'll get a kick out of this. That was after they won the game with Texas A&M, and he looked at the schedule. He goes, win, win, win. We're running the table. Wouldn't you know they would lose the next week to Northern Illinois at home. But under the old format, Ed, your guys would have been done. You would have had no shot at this.
First of all, good morning, Dave. Great to have you on. I don't mind you saying Ohio State right now looks to be the best football team. We will take care of business on the field, and then you will give my team their accolades later. I know you will do that. David, I look at – Matt was right. In back in the day, losing Northern Illinois, you're done. I look at the bowl situation. You hit a key point. Division II, Division III, and back in the day, 1AA. They went to 16-team tournament. Everything was great. The reason we didn't hear about it, wasn't talked about much, because it wasn't Division I. But it worked out fine. They had all the conference champions from those leagues in there. They had the best at-large teams in there. The seeding was done fairly well. It's almost like, how did they get that right? And then they look at Division I, and it's all over the place. Oh, we can't do that. This is my belief. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to go to 16 teams probably the year after next. I hope they'll let all the division conference winners in, but they're not going to get no high seed. Jacksonville State, you win Atlantic Sun or whatever it is, you're going to be seeded number 16. And maybe the number 3 from SEC is going to be seeded 4th. Okay, I ain't got a problem with that either, because I want to see, hopefully on paper, the 2 best teams meet in the championship game, if that's possible. I know there's going to be changes, and you don't want to tell me this. The 4 teams that had the buys, the higher seeds, all lost in the last round. That is going to resonate. David, tell me about some of that stuff I'm just mentioning.
Yeah, I do think there's a great chance that the tournament grows again, right? College basketball fans might be old enough to remember when the NCAA tournament was 32 teams rather than the current 68, or maybe even something smaller than that. And even at those lower divisions of college football, we've seen the expansion of the tournament from what was maybe once 8 teams and then 16 teams and then 24 teams or whatever. So I do think over time, I don't think it'll happen next year because all those deals are in place. But after next year, we're going to have this huge debate about what the new system is going to look like. I think you're very likely to be correct about the expansion from 12 beyond that, probably 16. When it comes to the conference champions, I don't think we're going to get to a point soon where, for example, right now we have 9 major conferences at the Division I level, the FBS level. I don't think we're going to see 9 conference champions getting in because the wealthiest leagues want to make the rules in such a way that you're not giving too many spots to those group of 5, as we call them, champions. The American Athletic Conference, Conference USA, et cetera, Mountain West. I think you're going to see a system that even if it is 16, let's say, yeah, you'll have a certain number of conference champions getting those automatic bids, but I think you're going to see more at-large bids. And, of course, those at-large bids by committee, a vote of committee, are going to come largely from the SEC and the Big Ten, the 2 leagues that are making the most money, and they get to have a huge voice in making the new rules, but also the Big 12 and the ACC, the other 2 leagues in what we call the Power 4 conferences in football. So I think what we're going to see is kind of a hybrid of all those things that you just suggested. It'll just be 2026 before we see, a major shakeup.
Yeah, you made a great point in terms of Big Ten, SEC, all the power money. That's they got the TV contracts. It's almost where I can see the SEC and the Big Ten going a little bit crazier, grabbing a couple of those power teams from the ACC, Big 12. Now they got 25 each. That's 50. More than likely, your national champion every year would be in that 50. And say to the NCAA, thank you, but no thank you. We don't really need you for football. We have all the we have all the power teams. We have East Coast, West Coast, North, South. So we're going to get the TV markets and break away. I could see that. And that was talked about years ago where football would somehow gravitate themselves away from the NCAA so that they can dictate how they want it run. And I really think that's kind of how this is looking. It's just going to take a little bit of time in terms of that happening. But you see ACC and Big 12 teams, of those better ones, kind of looking about how can they get into those 2 conferences because everybody sees where it's going.
Yeah, right now, for example, we have ongoing lawsuits where Florida State wants out of the ACC, Clemson wants out of the ACC. Those lawsuits, as we tried to tell everybody, it was not going to be a quick resolution. I practiced law for a long time, and I tried to warn everybody, especially the Florida State fans, telling me how there was some magic wand where the Seminoles were going to be able to leave and leave without penalty. I told them that was a bunch of rubbish, and now they know that I was right about that. It's a complicated set of circumstances, but you're right. Everybody, not everybody, almost everybody would love to be a part of either the Big Ten or the SEC. And, Coach, I do think, I don't know when it'll happen, but I do think there's going to come a time. Because one thing we've learned about college sports and really many other things here in the good old United States of America is if you follow the money, you end up being right about a lot of your guesses and projections. And the reality is that college football at some point is going to want a system that more resembles the NFL. And keep in mind, we're already halfway there. I mean, we're semi-professional. What is the only postseason in all of college sports that is not governed by the NCAA? It's FBS level football. Every other postseason tournament in every other sport, including FCS football, D2, D3, it's all governed by the NCAA. Even the playoff we have now is not governed by the NCAA. So that's part of that breaking away that you were describing a minute ago. What I think will evolve into, again, the timetable is harder to predict, but whether it is, 2 24-team leagues, one of the reasons the NFL is so popular is that fans identify with stars and key players and you understand rosters in a way that because there are so many college football teams, nobody can possibly know the star players on every roster the way you can in the NFL. Where if major college football evolves to a point where there are these 2 mega conferences, totaling maybe 24 plus 24, maybe America would follow those 48 college football teams to such a closer degree that if there's just a game between Team A and Team B, they're more likely to tune in because they know more about the guys at Ohio State or Alabama or these other power programs than they could possibly know right now because, the entertainment and sports dollar is splintered among so many teams, right? We have, 70 or so teams in the Power Four right now. We have more than 100 at the FBS level football teams. And so I think you would see sort of a concentration of TV dollars following sort of an NFL model, right? The NFL has the AFC and the NFC. Maybe the college football ranks will have the Big Ten and the SEC and whatever new members they add, whether it's Florida State, Clemson, maybe a UNC, the best of the Big 12. Maybe Notre Dame at some point gives up its independence to be a part of this new mega league. Who knows? I don't think that's on our front burner, but I do think if we, talked again, at the end of this decade, we may be closer to something like you're describing there.
We're talking with David Glenn. He's the host of the David Glenn Show. Check him out, David Glenn Show, ncsportsnetwork.com/DG Show. Our guest here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on Cova Sports TV. As you see on the screen there, the Final Four is set with the 6, 7, 8, and 5 seeds. Penn State taking on Notre Dame, Ohio State taking on Texas. A couple of ACC teams got through, David, and Clemson and SMU. Clemson bounced by the Longhorns, and SMU bounced by Penn State. Of course, in the Big 12's case, Arizona State took Texas to overtime with a wild comeback. But I want to hit on this with you to kind of salvage the ACC and Big 12. And right now, the SEC's in panic mode. If Texas, which is a newbie to the league, does not get to the championship game, oh my goodness, Greg Sankey and company will be going, what in the world here? But are those leagues saved by having these big mega personalities as coaches? Certainly Dabo Swinney was that for Clemson for a long time. Now it's Bill Belichick in Chapel Hill at UNC. You got Deion Sanders at Colorado. What keeps those conferences keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, with the SEC and Big 12 in your SEC and Big 10 in your eyes?
Well, they're not keeping up financially. They're probably not keeping up either when it comes to the sort of baseline elements that add into TV contracts. And that is not as many people watch, generally speaking, ACC football games or Big 12 football games. If the three of us researched, let's say, the 50 most watched college football games, put aside the bowls, just say the regular season, overwhelmingly that top 50 most watched games would be Big Ten games and SEC games. And that's why TV partners are willing to pay more for those products. Now, every time Dabo Swinney gets it going at Clemson, or Mike Norvell, not last year, but the previous 2 years really had it going at Florida State. Maybe Bill Belichick works some magic at UNC. We'll see. At different times, it's different schools in the Big 12 that kind of emerge as, the way Arizona State did this year. The more winning teams you have, the more high-profile players and coaches you have, it usually does translate to TV eyeballs. So the ACC needs not only Clemson to stay great. They've won almost all the ACC titles over the last decade. Not quite all, but close to it. They need Florida State to bounce back. Miami's been on the upswing under Mario Cristobal. They need the Hurricanes to stay good. Obviously, the Belichick factor is one that everybody's watching at UNC. This is a 17-team Atlantic Coast Conference now in the sport of football. And at times, they become not irrelevant, but less relevant, certainly in football. And heck, this year, the ACC has been really struggling compared to its historical standard in men's basketball. So the current commissioner of the ACC, Jim Phillips, has to be really nervous because he knows that we're living in a world where the most money, football is kind of the tail that wags the financial dog. And the ACC has always been considered kind of a 1B league in the sport of football. But the ACC has often been considered the best league in men's basketball, which is also a huge revenue producer. And right now, it's not even close to being the best league in men's basketball. So if you're struggling in football, struggling in men's basketball, you have some problems on your hands. The ACC's bowl record this year is horrifically bad. They were happy to get SMU and Clemson into the playoff. That was very helpful. But the way the ACC lost that SEC basketball challenge with that ugly record, man, it's been as shaky. I've been covering the ACC since 1987. And this is about as shaky a combination of football and men's basketball as I have seen in those 37 years.
Well, I want to go there with you, David, and I'll let Ed jump back in here, and we'll get your thoughts on the Final Four for the playoff and also some more college hoops. I'm sure Ed has a couple questions on that for you. But I was just speaking with a bracketologist guy yesterday who said, this is what he told me. You tell me if he's wrong. He said, right now, as we sit here on January 4th of 2025, he only sees 4 definites in the NCAA men's tournament for the ACC with Duke, Clemson, Pitt, and SMU. Now, Louisville, which just got the win over Carolina at home, can work its way in. UNC can work its way in. But you look at the Big Ten, and I said to him, who wins the Big Ten regular season? You got UCLA now. You got Washington playing Maryland. This league is so humongous, and the SEC has just been incredible right now. But it's hard to fathom. You could have 8th, 9th, 10th place teams in the SEC and Big Ten make the NCAA tournament. And this year, the ACC, it might have more than, 3-4 teams that are guaranteed?
It's crazy because remember a long time ago, the Atlantic Coast Conference was an 8-team league or a 9-team league. And it was so good in men's basketball in the 1980s that there were times that the Atlantic Coast Conference got 6 of their 8 or 9 members into the big dance. And that wasn't just like every once in a while. It happened multiple times. Imagine if you get 5 out of 9 or 6 out of 9. I mean, that means the majority of your teams are going. Now, you can't just get 4 or 5 or 6 in when you're now this 18-school monstrosity, thanks to repeated expansions, including this past year when you added Cal and Stanford and SMU. I agree with the starting point of that conversation. Obviously, Duke is one of the best teams in the nation. Pitt and Clemson, I think, are really good this year and are going to be tournament teams as well. SMU probably will end up in the big dance. Long way to go. But I think Carolina and Louisville also have a really good chance to end up there. 6 out of 18 would still not be a great number, relatively speaking. The more members you have, the more you want to be that league that you were just describing, where maybe you get 9 or 10 teams in. There was that crazy year in the Big East years ago where, it felt like 3/4 of the Big East members were in the same NCAA tournament. We know this is not a vintage year for the ACC, but with conference play really just starting to ramp up now, I remind folks that Carolina, for example, has a win over UCLA on its resume, has a win over a Dayton team that I think is going to be, maybe even a top 25 team, but certainly an NCAA tournament team. When you have 2 or more non-conference jewel victories on your resume, you could be 12-8 in the ACC and still make the NCAA tournament. So I wouldn't count out Louisville, wouldn't count out Carolina. But I absolutely agree with the premise that the ACC is not as good as it usually is in men's basketball, and it's nowhere near as deep as it usually is in men's basketball.
Crazy stuff, Ed.
Hey, Dave, I want to go back real quick. Kind of time is of the essence for you. Football, back into football. One of the things I'm hearing off and on throughout the year is strength of schedule. Oh, you didn't play nobody. And Notre Dame is now taking that hit, where back in the day they were playing the greatest schedule in the world. Now they're taking a hit for it. I'm thinking to myself, with conference play, you get 8, 9 games already set. In college football, you only usually have 12. So you got to, let's just say 3 games got to be scheduled. Now, you notice most of the power teams, they'll try to play 1 or 2 powers, but they try to put that directional university team in there somewhere for a win. We know what that means. Do you foresee maybe soon, and I know there's legal stuff to it also, where, okay, you have your conference schedule, but the committee is going to set up everybody's 3 non-conference games. So we get more of a number 2 last year, big ACC play number 2, Big 12, SEC number 5 is playing Big 10 number 5. So now we can kind of take some of that. Well, they don't play nobody. But are the schools going to allow that? And, of course, money talks if they do that. Yeah. Can you see something like that happening?
Football, maybe more. If that hypothetical we discussed earlier, the possibility of an even bigger SEC and even bigger Big Ten, maybe they each have 24 teams or whatever. So now you've got this 48-team monstrosity. As you said, every money talks, right? And if the creation of that league, again, outside the NCAA umbrella, this would be kind of going even more rogue than football has been historically. And it's been, again, for decades, that one top-level playoff that's not under the NCAA umbrella. You could have the TV partners saying that all of your games have to be against other members of that 48-team newly created monster double league. So anything is possible when it comes to how these schools need money, right? Name, image, likeness money. A lot of fans don't totally get this. Name, image, likeness money to this point, as we're having this conversation, comes from third parties. That means if one of us owned Bob Tractors and we wanted the point guard or the quarterback to represent our company and be a spokesperson and sign autographs and make personal appearances and maybe, blast our brand on social media, that third party, Bob's Tractors, or you might own a car dealership or whatever, those are outside the university's athletic departments. And they've created these things called collectives outside the university's athletic departments. That's how these young people are getting name, image, likeness money. Starting maybe later this year, that name, image, likeness money will be coming from within the athletic department itself. So that's a new $20 million at many of these schools, a new budget issue that you have to address that was not a part of last year's budget. So I think you're going to see more and more of a willingness to bend over backwards for your TV partners so that you can make up for that revenue shortfall. And one way that you could bend over backwards would be to agree to a plan where your TV partners say all 12 of your games will be against someone else among these 48 well-known brands. And because they want TV inventory that counts, they know almost nobody watches Power. Only the diehard fans watch Power University against Directional University. You might get 100,000 people, 250,000 people, best case, 1 million people to watch that game. When you get brand name against brand name, you can get 3 million, 4 million. There are regular season games that there were 10 and 12 million people watching. And that just creates dollars that these universities need in a way that the current system with some of those cupcakes on the schedule just doesn't justify.
And my last question to you, I know Matt might have another one or two. With all this stuff with football, every football, as you said, that's the tail. That's the one that's the lead ship, whatever. But basketball at some schools is big because they don't have football or their football is not a big deal. Is there ever going to be some kind of harmony where they can do something with a team with basketball, but yet with their football thing is completely different? And again, with the two powers, 48 conference, I could see that happening. But how do you look at it in terms of, is it like, oh man, we feel sorry for ACC basketball because football's dominating, that's just the way it's going to be? How is that ever going to be harmonized?
It's a great question. I think, gosh, if we were sort of kings for a day a long time ago, as all of this stuff started getting into such bigger money than it used to be. I wrote an article about what coaches were paid even 20 years ago. That's 20 years ago, not ancient history. And today, Bill Belichick's being paid $10 million a year at UNC in football. That's almost as much as, Kirby Smart at Georgia, a national champion, Dabo Swinney at Clemson, a national champion. Nobody ever thought UNC would be among the biggest, highest paying schools in the sport of football. And UNC, of course, is a good example because it's much more known for its men's basketball than its football. If we could have created this world 30 years ago, I think we would have told schools, hey, treat your entire athletic department, led by men's basketball, the old-fashioned way. Stay in your leagues where you have long-standing rivalries. Stay in your leagues where most of your opponents you can almost bus to or have a short plane ride to. And that way your expenses are infinitely lower when you send the lacrosse team or the swimming team or the field hockey team or these sports that don't generate positive revenue after expenses for their universities. We could have created a world where you just treated football differently. And maybe your football program was a member of one of these two mega leagues, and all of your other sports, including men's basketball, would have stuck with your traditional conferences, your traditional rivalries, et cetera. That would have made a lot more sense. And this isn't like, a dream world. I'm talking about it not only would make more sense philosophically, logically, it would make more sense financially to do it that way. So each of these universities in the end, given that we missed our opportunity to be kings for a day, each of these universities is going to have to decide, how they want to handle that balance. In my state of North Carolina, a little bit more than a decade it was, the Charlotte 49ers decided that as a program that once sent a team to the Final Four in men's basketball, and that was their brand as a university, men's basketball, they decided that football had grown to a level of popularity and the tail wagging the dog financially, that Charlotte said it's worth the insane expense of creating a football program from scratch. It's not that they were jumping from D2 or FCS. They created it from scratch. Now, 12 years later, I think it is, they've made one bowl in 12 years. Yep. They have one of the smallest stadiums in all of FBS football. They don't win very often. They keep churning through coaches, and they're not yet getting the bang for the buck yet in football after more than a decade of trying. But that's just one example of how they handled it. In my backyard, App State decided that the money at the FBS level in football, remember, App State won multiple national championships at the FCS level. But they decided that the bigger money of FBS was big enough that rather than being that really big fish in a smaller pond, 3 national titles under their legendary football coach, Jerry Moore at App State, they jumped to the FBS. They're a member of the Sun Belt. They have rebranded their university in a little bit more of a national way, and they believe it has paid off for them, even though, the group of 5 schools are not realistic contenders to win the modern playoff version of this championship. So App State was willing to say goodbye to the chance of winning national titles, as they did at FCS, because their math suggested this greater emphasis on FBS football. Schools all over the place. I teach at UNC Wilmington. They don't have a football program at all, at any level. Have they debated the wisdom or not of adding football because of its prominence? They have. They have not pulled the trigger the way Charlotte did. And nobody claims to have the single one correct answer. It's complicated, man. It's really, really, really expensive to have an FBS level football program. And then you got to do a lot of calculus style math to determine whether the creation of that program just became, a money pit, or whether the immediate benefits with TV dollars, or even the broader benefits of just keeping your alumni engaged, maybe if they love football and wanted you to add football, it becomes a complicated calculus on how to balance basketball and football on your campus. And every one of these schools, Coach, has to answer that question in their own unique way, given their own unique set of circumstances.
Yeah, it's great perspective and insight, and something Old Dominion in our backyard looked at, and certainly Virginia Commonwealth, George Mason, other schools in Virginia have looked at too. We'll get you on this one. We thank you immensely for your time and your insight here, and we'll get you on closer to Selection Sunday, I'm sure, as well. All right, Final Four playoff here. Here's my feeling of it now, David. I think Ohio State's going to beat Texas in a shootout. I think Ed's Irish will grind it out against Penn State. Sorry, James Wood, if you're watching out there. He's a good friend of ours, Indian River Love, former Penn State DB. And then I feel like the Buckeyes beat Ed's Irish by a couple of scores in the title game. Is that your sense after the Buckeyes were getting all the ridicule, all the criticism after they lost to Michigan at home, and they should have? What's your gut tell you right now?
Well, for the record, Matthew and I did not have a conversation about this ahead of time, but my picks exactly match Matthew's picks. Exactly. Wow. To the T. And for the record, I am a guy who grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm part Irish. I was raised Catholic, so I have nothing against the Fighting Irish. I have relatives who went to Notre Dame. I've gone to games at Notre Dame. I've got the Irish Catholic blood all running through my veins. I'll be happy. And I actually know Riley Leonard personally because of his 3 years at Duke, where I got to know him a little bit and interview him a bunch of times. Really impressive kid. RJ Oben is a former Blue Devil as well, now playing really well for the Irish defense. Yeah. So what I'm rooting for is different than what I predict. But, man, when I watch Ohio State play right now, they just look like a runaway freight train to me.
Yeah. Jeremiah Smith's a different cat out there, no doubt about it. Well, hey, David, enjoy the games. I'm sure we'll get you back on. Ed's going to be hoping and praying. He's a PA native as well here, so he's got a lot of blood up there, and he loves his Irish. All the best to you, and we'll talk down the road. Thanks so much. Check him out, ncsportsnetwork.com. Have a good one.
Great to be with you guys. Always appreciate the invitation. Keep up the good work. See you.
Thanks, David.
You too. David Glenn, our guest here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk. We come back. We've got Dwight Vick, former